Well, the Chicago Fire changed up their formation for the first time all year Saturday night in Minnesota, and fair to say things went pretty well, but how much can we learn from that? There's less than a month in the regular season. The Fire look like they're pretty much a lock for the wild card. What does that mean? We're going to chat about that with Jeff Rueter from The Athletic and Total Soccer Show next on CHGO Fire. This is CHGO Fire. I'm Alex Campbell. Thanks for joining me live on the CHGO YouTube channel or listening wherever you get your podcasts. Since our last show, Fire played 3 games. They went up 3-0 against the New England Revolution and then tried very hard to lose that game, managed not to anyway. They lost 3-1 against NYCFC because the Fire will never beat that team. Apparently, they are their kryptonite. And then this past weekend, they had a really comprehensive win, 3-0 on the road against Minnesota United, because the Fire, if they're on the road, are maybe the best team in MLS. To focus on that last game in particular, as well as look forward a bit to the playoff picture as it comes into focus, I'm joined by a former guest on this show. He's a senior writer for The Athletic and a weekly Tuesday co-host of the Total Soccer Show, wherever you are likely listening to this podcast. Jeff Rueter, welcome back, and thanks for volunteering to work MLS podcast overtime on this Tuesday.
Yeah, it's the day of the week when everyone's chatting MLS, right? All the water coolers in the country have been held to a boil with Monday's discourse as everyone talks about Major League Soccer at their offices, of course. So, happy to be doing it, and thanks for having me back, man.
And I'm sure offices across the nation are just aghast at how terribly run DC United are as a team. So it so happens that the two MLS teams that you and I are most familiar with, our respective local clubs, faced off this weekend. Fire win 3-0. Notable things about these lineups. I want to start with Minnesota while we're here because they're missing a couple key players in Kelvin Yeboah and Carlos Harvey, both out at least the rest of the regular season. Yeboah being their striker is obviously a problem given that Tani Oluwaseyi went to Villarreal in the summer and they didn't really have a backup plan for that. The closest thing is Mamadou Dieng, who they signed from Hartford Athletic in the USL Championship. He was one of 4 first-time MLS starters in this Minnesota 11 that the Fire took on Saturday night at Allianz Field. Jeff, are Minnesota just kind of hanging on and being thankful that the Western Conference only has 4, maybe 5 good teams on it, and they can just kind of stumble their way into home field advantage?
Yeah, I think that's about it. Look, this is most years Minnesota United has not been in a spot where they have been one of the top 4 teams in the Western Conference, right? Like even the year that they made it to the conference final in 2020, they were sort of a late riser. They had signed Emmanuel Reynoso that summer. This is sort of the inverse, where they started the year very strong. They sustained it. And then they went through most of the summer window as one of the least active teams in MLS's transfer window. And the idea was that this was a team that had been built to coalesce. Right now, this was kind of their window of opportunity. There were some players like Oluwaseyi, Joaquin Pereira. You can maybe argue Dane St. Clair and Nick Marcanich just for like positional scarcity reasons would maybe command that money necessary to retool the squad and to avoid what the LA Galaxy went through this last winter, right? And instead, the opportunity came late in the window as Villarreal struggled to land their other backup striker options, where Tani Oluwaseyi then breaks out, is getting more minutes with Canada. Canada, of course, a co-host of the World Cup, but they also have Jesse Marsch. They have a little bit more of that pull, that intrigue. A Canada international is something that is not seen as an insult anymore, like it was in the 90s and 2000s for the most part. And so they come in, they make an offer that Minnesota chooses not to refuse, and they have no backup plan. And so the worst case scenario plays out in the Open Cup semifinal midweek. Kelvin Yeboah goes down injured for the rest of the regular season, a hamstring knock. That was kind of weirdly ridiculed by CBS's halftime show, but ends up he will be out for the rest of the regular season. He may or may not come back for the playoffs. They have no alternatives in the role. So there's that. And I think that Minnesota will look and say any game where Kelvin Yeboah cannot start is one that they're going to be worse, but also their alternatives in the role are now a starting midfielder, Robin Lod, and a starting right wing back, Bonky Longwane. So you're going to have to do some shuffling. But I don't want to just say like Chicago got lucky by catching Minnesota right after the cup set and therefore, it's a fluke. I don't think this is a fluke. I think that Chicago has been building to be competitive in games like these for some time. I think that this is a case where you have to look at Minnesota's window and say a lot of these issues were self-inflicted and could have been avoided with, if not patience and wanting to trust that Oluwaseyi would still have a market in the winter, then certainly not doing their research to have a make-weight replacement waiting in the wings.
Right, and so the Fire come up against that Minnesota team. Gregg Berhalter goes not 4-3-3 for the first time all season. We see three center backs with Sam Rogers and Joel Waterman joining Jack Elliott in the back three. A Jay Davila and Alan Franco double pivot, which was interesting for a lot of reasons. Usual front three, Zinckernagel, Kuipers, Bamba. Gregg doesn't change his tactics often, obviously. This felt like potentially matching up with Minnesota and also given Minnesota's set-piece FC reputation, hey, let's just get some more big dudes on the field, and that paid dividends. And I think the biggest thing was, Julian Gressel and Nick Markanek just did not have a lot of room to do anything in this game because of the way Dean and Gutman were pushing up. So, I'm not sure if this is something we're going to see more of from the Fire, but I felt like if this was a, we're going to dial up for the occasion situation, I thought Berhalter got this spot on.
And you would maybe argue then this is practicing for the playoffs, right? Because like you'd said in the cold open, this is a team that is going to be at the bare minimum in the play-in round, but certainly not looking top four in the East. And I think that everyone knew that coming into the season. So you need to have a look that is going to be able to spoil against these teams that want to control, not like the possession battle necessarily, because Minnesota is obviously as possession averse as any team in MLS history has ever been. But the thing is, they are confident in their model and they're good at executing it. So even if they don't have the ball, it's playing to their strengths, right? It's the same thing as think of a Jesse Marsh New York Red Bulls or a Wilfred Nancy Columbus. It doesn't matter how it looks. If you're getting to play the game you want to play it, you're happier, you're more comfortable, and you think that you're going to be able to overcome your opponent. I think this is also kind of responding to some of the issues that Chicago had this year, where the midfield hasn't come together in the way that it was supposed to be. And I don't think anyone expected Kellyn Acosta to have the sort of season he has had. And I think that, right, exactly, right. And that's a big part of it too, is that even when he comes on, it's 20-minute shifts. I don't think he's made a start since June, right?
One in the Open Cup, I think, but in the league, it's at least that long.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at that transaction, it isn't just the case of Kellyn Acosta is one of the top 5 midfielders in MLS. I don't think I would say that in his role, but I think that he is someone who is assumed to be the one you didn't have to sweat out when you put him in the lineup with all of the work that he had done in Colorado and in LAFC. I think that there was this sort of idea you were still getting at least 3 years of top tier, 80th or higher percentile center midfield play, and then the rest of it can figure itself out. Well, if he's been impossible to rely on, now you have to bring in other shapes. And if you don't think that you have 3 alternatives in those roles, just throw in another center back because you have more defensive stability. It allows Gutman more cover. So as he's committing down the left side, he's not caught unaware like he was a couple of weeks ago, or was that midweek?
Yeah, that NYCFC game was pretty brutal. Was pretty brutal for Gutman in that particular role. And we'll talk about this, but Jack Elliott, it allows him to get on the ball in some space, and he's kind of got that instinct where he wants to be a bit of an attacker. Jack Elliott, you can tell he's a guy who probably grew up playing some striker because he was the tall kid on his team as a kid. He just wants to do that. Because we mentioned the height. Joel Waterman, new center back, brought in a few weeks ago from Montreal, gets his first goal for the club in the 26th minute. It's Alan Franco, at the Fire's latest recruit, swinging it in with his left foot. Sam Rogers, another center back, heads it down. Waterman scores. The biggest thing, I think, from this goal and then the subsequent one was the Fire have not had anybody to offer a set-piece delivery like Franco on this team this season. Philip Zinckernagel is great with his right foot, but it was maybe the only redeeming quality of Xherdan Shaqiri as a Fire player is that his left foot on dead balls was great, and the Fire haven't had that at all. And so to watch this, and then the Jay Davila goal as well, which credit to the Fire social media team, they put a TikTok up that literally just laid the 2 clips over each other and showed how they were the exact same goal. Yeah, I mean, we just see an example here of a couple new tools the Fire have at their disposal being used to really nice effect.
Yeah, and like you said, that's going to make set pieces so much more effective, which then those are the fine margins. Again, Minnesota is a team right now that, because of how little they want the ball, they are a team whose entire efficacy of like winning or drawing in these close games against the best teams in MLS requires set piece success. And we always focus on how many tall guys are there, how many like the headers, what was the movement in these set pieces, right? Like
Hmm.
it's the taker. The taker is going to be the most crucial thing. You think about like even the U.S. men's national team, they have one of the best set piece coaches in the world that they brought over from AC Milan and from Italy, and he's worked some really good work. But if he doesn't have a taker, if he's got Christian Pulisic hitting the first defender on 4/5 of his corner kicks, it's not really going to matter what the rest of the guys are doing. Like it will for that fifth kick, but I think that for Chicago, that's where it becomes crucial, is that you're not like hamstrung to only if Zinckernagel is at a good angle where he's going to be able to whip the ball accordingly.
Right.
And I think that just bodes well for them, again, as you get into the playoffs.
Yeah, and on that second goal, it's worth noting, I think, too, Jay Davila. I mean, I and basically everybody who watches this team closely watched his first 4, 5, 6 appearances and was like, "Oh no!" Like, what? This looks like a guy who's awkward, who hasn't grown into his height as a young guy, who doesn't have like the touch or whatever. And then over the last month, you could start to see why the Fire were fighting off pretty big European teams for his signature. If he can be a guy who is ball secure and can be a bit of a ball carrier in there,
Yeah.
talk about the midfield not coalescing. That's a guy who just can be glue for the entire team if that's something that works out. So I'm really curious, as the team rolls into next year, whatever it looks like, what role Gregg Berhalter sees for Jay Davila, because he persisted with him over guys like Kellen Acosta or Mauricio Pineda, guys who were not super high ceiling guys, but you knew would set a floor and aren't going to be defensive catastrophes, aren't going to give the ball away at the back. And Greg kind of stuck to his guns on this one, and he has, unsurprisingly, been proven to know more about soccer than most of us who are opining on the team. So yeah, that's been a really cool development, though. I think, I don't know if you, as an outsider from the Chicago perspective, have had any thoughts about what you've seen when you've gotten a chance to watch this team from Davila specifically.
Yeah, I think with him as well, being as young as he is, and then coming over for the first time in North America, certainly having come through in Portugal, but obviously Cote d'Ivoire as like his nationality. Like there's going to be a lot of transition and acclimation
Mm-hmm.
time, and I think that right now we are in an era where the transfer market feels so close to the EAFC video games or Football Manager, where these things just happen and there's 4 or 5 moves per window, and the guys will hit immediately because their overall is fixed, and there's nothing about like how are the kids settling in? Are they sleeping well? Are they doing well in school? Are my partners happy? Right? Like you don't have that in video games. So
Right.
there's a lot of this sort of stuff where it does take time. It can take half a season or longer, a full season for someone to acclimate. The teams that are able to keep these guys around for 2, 3, 4 years, that's when you really start to see them paying off for a young midfielder like Davila. And I think that you look at go back into the team shape. If you have 3 center backs that you really trust in the back there, your midfielders have more bailouts. So they're high risk passes that get turned over. Well, you have more cover. So those mistakes look less glaring if they don't always lead to a shot because your defense is set up to account for those mistakes. So I think in a way,
Right.
this setup should embolden him, which is always good for our young players, more confidence to, just try your stuff and we'll see. And if we have to rein it in by bringing in a third midfielder, okay, well, now we know you can do that sort of stuff and we can integrate it and build like a more formidable true engine room with 3 of us, but we know what you're bringing to it. So I think that overall this stretch, however sustained it can be, and I would imagine you have to keep going back to this team shape at least more often with how well it worked over the weekend. I think that could be very, very good for his development and other players like him who are still trying to find their way in the midfield, even a Brian Gutierrez or whatever else. Just having experience in multiple team shapes is going to make you more effective no matter the defense, right? Like, and you think of the
Right.
alternative with like the young Americans in Europe right now who are all system players for the most part and pretty much asked to be role players doing the exact same thing, and their training is for one role and one system. It's why someone
Mm-hmm.
like Cardozo can struggle when he gets to the U.S. men's national team. He's very used to playing Real Betis ball and now Atletico Madrid ball, right? He's not used to just playing midfield soccer in whatever team shape necessarily.
Right. And so when I want to touch on that, on some details of the shape more in a moment here, because they're playing Columbus next. And so I assume we are going to see this shape run out again, given that Columbus is also a team that plays in, I guess we'll call it a 3-4-2-1 or whatever Wilfred Nancy would call it. The Fire
Yeah.
get their final goal of this game in the most Fire way possible after scoring two very Minnesota United-y goals. Ball goes in behind down the left wing. Julian Gressel does not look good here. Andrew Gutman runs onto this. Ugo Kuipers makes a run across the area, drags two center backs with him. Gutman cuts it back. Zinckernagel is wide open in the middle of the box. Does a nice little fake to just send Markanich sliding off screen, basically, and then just roofs it into the top of the net for 3-0. Philip Zinckernagel now has 27 goal involvements for the Fire this season. That is one behind Nemanja Nikolić's club record when he won the MLS Golden Boot in 2017. He is also one behind the single-season assists record of 14. Jerzy Podbrozny in 1998 and Peter Novak in 2000 are the two guys he's chasing there. And then he's one goal behind Mike McGee for the third most in a season in club history.
It's good company.
Yeah, it's good company. None of us saw this coming, but Jeff, you're certainly got more of a national profile perspective. Philip Zinckernagel, MLS Best 11?
He's on my short list for sure. He's forcing some really tough decisions, and he's sort of an unfortunate timing of his arrival, where he's not even going to be the most talked about Danish player to join the league in a similar role with Anders Dreyer and what he's doing over in San Diego. But I think that when you look at what Zinckernagel has done, I was more familiar with Jonathan Bamba this summer when he had signed, and so I think I'd focused on him for a Moves I Like series. But I think that when you look at Zinckernagel, there's just so much consistency and dependability, where these are the sorts of players Berhalter needed to be able to get his own sort of system, his vision, his game plan to work, and to have them in key roles. Your designated players need to be players who are going to be among your three most impactful if you're going to do the 3-and-3 model. Right now, there's just the trade-off of doing the 3 DPs and the 3 U22s rather than 2 DPs and 4 U22s is that you lose that $2 million of GAM. So you have to be better at building a squad in order to have that third expensive outlay. And I think that if you have a Zinckernagel and if you have Bamba, who I still think next year, I think that he could be absolutely fantastic in this league. And then, you still have, the third DP spot for Hugo Kuipers, who has also been one of the most productive center forwards. If you're going to do it like that, Chicago is actually really well set up for both this year and next year. And I think that with Zinckernagel in particular, it's the set pieces, it's the consistency, it's the calmness, it's being able to operate regardless of what the defense is throwing at you, whereas Bamba kind of needs more open space to run into and be able to do his thing to be as effective as possible. And like you shouted out, really smart interplay with Hugo Kuipers and the dummy run to take two defenders away. Those sorts of relationships only come with time, but if he and Zinckernagel are already working those out in year one to such success as they have been, especially over the last month or two, it only means good things moving forward for the two of them as long as they're in town.
Right, and Zinckernagle's actually just max TAM right now, though I imagine his agent will be ringing up Gregg Berhalter.
I was going to say, I'm assuming some things here, but
yeah, to say that, hey, that 2-and-4 model you've got there is nice and all, but we're going to need a little more money for what we just did.
Exactly.
Before we take a quick ad break, I did want to note, you kind of referenced this. An issue the Fire have had all season is when they're trailing in games, they don't have ways to change the games off the bench, because often in their 4-3-3, the only attacking-ish options they have are Tom Barlow and Marin Haile Selassie, which, no offense to those guys, but that's just not a whole lot of depth or versatility there. And in a game like this, you have a situation where Brian Gutierrez can come off the bench, and you can either play him in the midfield if you're really going for it, or he can play Bamba or Zinckernagle's spot. Sergio Orehel is on the bench as a guy who could be a good box-to-box forward-thinking option. You can move Franco up to the Zinckernagel role if you needed to. You have Leo Barroso on the bench, who's very wing-backy and can be in a better spot in that scenario. So, yeah, I think that's the other thing I really liked about this shape, is it just gives Berhalter more options. We're going to talk about where this leaves the Fire and how MLS is looking as we head toward the playoffs right after a quick couple of words from folks who make CHGO Fire possible. And first, that is Eye on the Ball. All right, athletes, here's a question. Are you serious about leveling up your game? Because the right coach can change everything. And now finding one is easy with Eye on the Ball. Doesn't matter if you're just a kid starting out or competing at the top level, you can sign up totally free at eyeontheball.net. Create your profile, search through coaches in your sport, and connect directly with the one that's right for you. From soccer to swimming, baseball to basketball, you name it, the coaches are there. So what are you waiting for? Your future coach could be one click away. Jump on today at eyeontheball.net. That's IEYE ontheball.net. Find your coach and take your game to the next level. Also, shout out to a very long-time sponsor of CHGO and CHGO Fire. That is Shady Rays. We've all had that moment where we know we have left our sunglasses somewhere, whether it was on the roof of a car, at the beach, you left it at home, you forgot it at a rest stop. We've all had that moment. I've broken a pair of Shady Rays before as well. I've lost sunglasses before, and Shady Rays really changed the game because their sunglasses are made for real life. They're good looking, they're durable, and if you lose or break them, even on day one, Shady Rays will send you a brand new pair. This pair I'm currently wearing are thanks to Shady Rays lost or broken guarantee. So when I wear my sunglasses or you get a pair of Shady Rays, they can be worn without fear. Hikes, concerts, on a boat, wherever, Shady Rays is eyewear that has your back. Jeff, we're going to take a look here in a moment at the standings, but I would be remiss if I did not mention some kind of quiet news the Fire made this week. They issued two different sets of 3 player re-signings. First was 3 homegrowns. Chris Brady, who this is contract number 3 for him now. Sergio Orejel and Mauricio Pineda are all sticking around. And then yesterday it was announced that Chris Mueller, who has been out all season due to a heart condition, Jeff Gall, backup goalkeeper, and Jonathan Dean have all signed extensions as well. A quick note, from a U.S. men's national team perspective, Jeff, the note here is for Chris Brady, who this deal feels like a bit of, hey, plan A is we've got a good value or maybe a slightly overpaid young goalkeeper who could be here for a long time. Or option B, if somebody wants to come in and try to pry him away, we have just padded the transfer fee a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that given his age, you're almost assuming the latter right now, unless or until he gets to like 24. And I'm trying to remember now how old Petrovic was when he left New England. And I know he wasn't a homegrown, but you would maybe look at that's when Zach Steffen. Matt Turner was a little older, but usually you're not quite thinking like this is our guy for the next decade if they're as young as Chris Brady is. But I think that when you think of he is incorporated into the men's national team core right now under Maurizio Pochettino. And I think that there is a very realistic path where he is the second or third goalkeeper at this World Cup. And that would be a massive opportunity for him. And that would be a massive opportunity for the Chicago Fire's development of goalkeepers, following Gaga Slonina. And I think, showing that the next prospect maybe can avoid some of the hiccups that have been made with the lone progression of Slonina at Chelsea. I also think that this is just
what not to do is Gaga, I believe, is currently sitting on a cold piece of metal somewhere in Lincoln, England at an EFL Cup game.
That's about right. Yeah, he is. And he's, they're going to spin it as he's training with the team every day and he's taking the shots and he'll get a couple of cup games when our backup, who is it, Philip Jorgensen is
Premier League bench for the next 3 weeks because Bob Sanchez decided he wanted to try to, not play some defense. So,
that's right.
There's that, I guess. But yeah, you make the point. The U.S. goalkeeper position right now is just absolutely wide open. Yes, Matt Turner is back playing in MLS with New England, but that team is terrible. And we don't know what their offseason is going to look like. And so it's, it could be anyone. And at this point, the Fire have, they've got several goalkeepers between the ages of 14 and 17, who they think really highly of. So there's no sign this pipeline is going anywhere. But yeah, it would be a shame to lose Brady, if he were to go abroad. But again, if he's playing for the national team next summer in a World Cup, that's just such a feather in the cap of everybody at the club and would be of Brady as well.
Absolutely. And then when you think of it at like just a club level, I love like re-signing news dumps like these, where you're saying there's 6 guys on this squad that we want to bring back who aren't the guys that you're buying jerseys for necessarily. And because that's where you actually do see continuity, a bedrock of success sort of built. It's what the Sounders have pretty much been doing since 22 when they missed the playoffs, but they won the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Like they've used that time to like establish depth to the point where we're talking about them like they're one of the deepest rosters in the history of Major League Soccer. And I think for the Fire, it means having faith in some of these guys, and even if they're 900-minute players, like Pineda might be your Dean, depending on like your ideal version of the Chicago Fire with all the transactions you'd bring in. If they're proving it at an MLS level, don't let them go. Don't do what Toronto does, where they kind of send all of their successful homegrowns wild for $400,000 at a time, and their squad suffers as a result for it. I think that there's a good sustainability path that's being established with moves like these. So I know it's not the sexiest press release to have hit the inbox, but at the same point, I think that for club continuity and ultimate long-term success, I think it's as important as just about anything short of, the stadium development and everything going on with the Fire right now.
Right, yeah, and there was my friend over at Men in Red 97, Tim Hotsey, reporting just before we went live that the Fire got past another procedural hurdle. There was one more vote on Thursday. It is not expected to be a problem, and then we are at shovels can go in the ground time. Let's take a look, though, at the Eastern Conference standings. Jeff, I'm going to include for the folks on YouTube the Red Bulls in this graphic for the context of them being there, but
That's
think
kind
we
of
can...
you.
Yeah, we can pretty safely say the Eastern Conference has its 9 teams. Philly and Cincy are fighting for that top spot and also for the Supporter Shield. Spots 3 through 8 could literally finish in any order at this point. The Fire seem kind of a lock to be 9th. Some context for the Fire's potential wildcard opponents, because this is very two different stories here. They've played Charlotte twice. They have won both those games. They've played NYCFC twice. They've lost them both. Miami, they drew at Soldier Field. They play them midweek next week in Miami. They've played Orlando twice and gotten 4 points out of that. Noteworthy, though, that the draw was with 10 men for 70 minutes. Nashville, they have played twice. They have lost both of those games, one of them in almost historic fashion. And then Columbus, they lost to on the opening day in a game where they famously just gave away 3 of the 4 goals. They, of course, take on the Crew in Chicago on Saturday. So, Jeff, trying to get a more unbiased perspective here, given where the Fire are sitting right now, given they've been so good on the road this year, and that making any progress in the playoffs will, of course, require going on the road in the wild card, but then they're going to have to play in a different stadium 3 nights later in the opener of a best-of-3 series. I mean, how do you think Fire fans should feel about where this team is sitting right now, basically with not a whole lot of question marks with a month to go about how this is going to play out?
Really, really good, because it's the first time that it's like fall colors are coming in across Illinois and you can care about the Fire competitively in almost a decade. And
it's 8 years at this point, and it's it's felt.
But
longer.
who's counting, right? Hi, Basti. How's it going? Dax McCarty now is just like talking at halftime of these games, and meanwhile, he was like the the savior who helped get you guys to the playoffs. I think when you look overall, there's a lot of reason to be excited, but this is about where I projected them to be. I think I'd picked them to be 8th or 9th in my preseason predictions, and the idea here is that it's not as much about how much ground did the Chicago Fire cover compared to last year's iteration. I think everyone would agree it's been a tremendous amount of progress. But I think it has to do with how stout and balanced the East is. I was talking about this on Total Soccer Show a week or two ago with Joe Lowry. And right now there are pretty much 14 teams that we're like could still win MLS Cup, and we can see the path and we understand who got them there, and it's not going to be a total shock. 9 of them are in the Eastern Conference. 5 of them are in the West, and Chicago is one of those 9. But obviously, it's like the most long shot story. It's pretty much replicating what the Red Bulls did and what Atlanta United started to pull off. And these are recent blueprints, and I would say that this Chicago Fire team is better than the 2024 Atlanta United team. So that's good too. Like, ostensibly, that means they can beat anybody, because if that team could beat a points record, Messi, Inter Miami side, like the Chicago Fire could hang. It's going to be consistency. It's going to come down to continuity. I think that there is more versatility in attacking options that Chicago has than some of the teams that we're looking at above. When you think about Columbus as constructed right now, how difficult of a year it's been with them for injuries. Miami, when Messi isn't firing at 100%. I think that you would look at Charlotte, even if Wilfred Zaha is being contained well for all the work he does in transition to free up Tokomani up top. I think that Chicago will be a tough team for anyone in the bracket, but I think you could say that about any of the top 9 teams. I don't think they're going to love the matchups. You're not going to see any sort of like everyone predicting a 2-game sweep.
Yeah,
What was
we're in the
that?
West. Whereas in the West,
Yeah.
as we can touch on, you can basically sim based on form. You can we'll look at it right now on YouTube. I think you could sim the Western Conference to basically the final at this point because Vancouver
Yeah.
looks good, LAFC looks real good. Everybody else is in just this massive, massive funk, and no one below Seattle is. Austin would not make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so yeah, it's just an entire different conversation over there right now. And if you look at the way Son has integrated at LAFC, Vancouver, their solution to Ryan Gauld being infinitely injured, being Thomas Muller, that's not too bad, and that seems to have worked well despite kind of the roster churn of their summer. So yeah, I think just the Eastern Conference is just going to be a much more interesting playoff picture. And if we look at the Fire's upcoming schedule, the game that could really rock this, if the Fire beat Columbus on Saturday night, they're 2 points behind them with a game in hand. And so again, I basically think the Fire are a lock for ninth because again, you look at those last two games, Toronto, New England, those are teams that will be, on the beach or on the ski slopes or wherever by that time and with nothing to play for. Inter Miami, I mean, who knows? Because Inter Miami has to play 7 games in the time most MLS teams are playing 3 over the next 3 weeks. And so will the Fire see anything close to a full strength Miami? Who's to say at this point? So I know they're, again, I think everybody around here is planning for ninth, but it's not inconceivable that the Fire could host the wild card. Now, at the same time, if they go out and lose against Columbus on Saturday, okay, forget it, pack it up, we're done here, and we'll see you in 3 weeks for the wild card game at destination to be determined. So, yeah, I mean, especially with the Fire's, this new shape they rolled out against Minnesota, Columbus's struggles, I mean, could be a wild card preview, honestly. So I think Saturday night is gearing up to be a game that suddenly has a lot more stakes attached to it than anybody I think would have expected.
I think so. And I think that I agree with you completely. Miami might look at that as a game that they need to rotate. It's a Tuesday. It's just like a weird day for the generation cycles of these senior players who will have their routines curated that have to be followed week to week. We have the double game Wednesday, Saturday schedule, and we have the single game Saturday schedule. And the Tuesday, genuinely, those sorts of things can force rotations that you wouldn't otherwise see in MLS. Right. You see it all the time in Europe, right? But you don't really see it in MLS with those Tuesday games. So it wouldn't surprise me if they did rotate a bit. And I think that if you rotate Miami a bit, I think that they found that Rodrigo De Paul isn't going to dominate and dictate games this year in the way that some hoped he could maybe do when Messi was catching his breath. He is still much more of a supplemental piece this year, and that's okay. But I think it means that it does force some harder decisions about rotation because it's a both and not an either or proposition with those two. The game that I would say is Toronto, I think has the potential to be one of those. That will be the trap game potential. I'm not really worried about going to New England at that point. I'm not real the Columbus game. If you get a point off of it, that's a fantastic result in its own right. So you have a little bit more leeway with it. But when you look at that in my mind, I'm like, okay, that's 5 or 7 points when you show me those 4 games. And the one thing that gives me pause, though, is if you drop all 3 against a Toronto side that right now is pretty much in its 2026 preseason already, and it has been since the summer. And so they are really well disciplined. All 6 of their last 6 games have finished either 0-0 or 1-1. So they are very good at making sure that they will get a draw at your expense and at the expense of the fun of anyone who's watching that game. But that can be really difficult to overcome if you're a team that has much more on the line than Toronto has. Also throw in the fact you've got Georgi Mihailovic, who is now being paid like a leading man in Major League Soccer at Toronto, coming to Chicago. What kind of dynamic are you going to have there? You're just not sure. And I think overall, Robin Fraser just wants to show that this thing is trending in the right direction. And it hasn't deserved nearly as much attention or praise as what Berhalter has going on right now with Chicago. But Toronto is really making strides right now to be a new version of itself that's closer to the modern Sounders than where it's youth driven and sustainable and stuff like that, rather than the old, we're going to sign the 3 most expensive players in the league and we just hope that's enough to overpower you. We're
going to go to the GM's son for advice on
exactly
who
and transfer marks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for those unfamiliar, that is a real thing that happened, and then they decided to pay that guy $12 million per year, and maybe the worst contract in MLS history. How not to run your soccer team. Quickly, Jeff, before I get you out of here, I really appreciate all the time. There's lots of teams any of us who become interested in European soccer can choose, and you are riding a wave right now a bit as a Bournemouth fan. So I wanted to get your 2 cents before we get you out of here on how much fun are you currently having, both having Andoni Iraola as the head coach of the team you support and just in general, like what on earth is going on at Bournemouth right now?
It's crazy, man. I mean, because it's like I've been a fan of Bournemouth for a decade now, right? And it was when Steve Fletcher saved us from liquidation, basically. We were in the 4th division. If we had fallen into the National League, our owner was going to pack up and go. The club would have pretty much folded. He scored the goal that saved us. We were already on a points deduction. And then we started upward ascent with Eddie Howe, right? And so that was why, was pretty much like, I want to find a team that was, because I was a kid who grew up and it's like, on ESPN, the only games they would show you were Champions League games involving Man United or Arsenal or Barcelona or Milan. So like, it was nice to see a different club. It was a really fun gateway into, the lower divisions beyond when I was playing FIFA at the time in college. But what was really cool was like, once they made it, it felt like every year there was stakes. It's promotion and relegation at its finest. And now we're in this weird spot where we're kind of the next Brighton. And I'm just like, oh, we're just like good. And I'm not worried about relegation, and we can lose our first game and we'll still, get 7 points from our next 9 available and be just fine. And there's not crisis right now. It's kind of uncomfortable. There's a point where like, I'm also a Minnesotan. So like I grew up with the Vikings. I grew up with the Timberwolves, the Twins, Chicago knows what the trajectory of those teams are. Cause often you're one of the markets that's beaten us over and over again. So like, I don't trust success. I am skeptical of it. I don't think it's allowed to happen to sports teams that you're a fan of. In my life, that's been my experience. So it's very strange to have one of the most in-demand coaches in Europe, a deep attacking core of players that is like self-sustaining and the ability to beat the top 6 and the like scrappy trap game relegation zone with similar levels of consistent success. It's nuts. I'm loving it.
Yeah, and hey, you get a couple MLS connections because now you got George Petrovic in goal. You got Tyler Adams just running people over in midfield, and you have Gregg Berhalter's old friend and now architect of all things Black Knight Soccer, Tim Bezbatchenko, formerly of the Columbus Crew, ultimately calling the sporting shots. So yeah, fun time.
And Iraola, member of the 2015 New York City FC.
Yes, and that very famous screenshot that from FOTMob that has him, Frank Lampard, and Andrea Pirlo in the slowest midfield in MLS history at the time, playing on a baseball field. What a time. He and Bournemouth have both come so far. Well, Jeff Rueter, really appreciate you taking this much time today to chat fire and other things as we head toward the home stretch of the MLS regular season. Check out Jeff's work at The Athletic. And if you missed it this morning, they had a nice chat over at the Total Soccer Show about teams that have not, had great seasons and are not going to be in the playoffs. Big DC United segment there, among others. So definitely go check that out. Jeff, thanks so much for your time, and we'll do this again sometime in the future, and hopefully it's another very enjoyable experience.
Would love that, man. Thanks for having me back, and keep up all the great work.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, that is going to do it today here from CHGO Fire. Shout out to Joey on the ones, the twos, the dials behind the scenes today, making it all possible. Again, the Fire are home this Saturday night at Soldier Field. They take on the Columbus Crew. Keep an eye out on that one. Only 4 games of the regular season to go, and then maybe, or probably, but, don't count your chickens, the Chicago Fire sure look like they're going back to the playoffs, and we'll be here for all of it on CHGO Fire. I'm Alex Campbell, and I'll see you next time.
We all silly like the mayor.